Well, welcome to episode 17 of 10-Minute Record Reviews, and this time we're going to talk about the Ramones album, their fourth album, Road to Ruin. And this is the 1978 first Canadian pressing on Sire Records. So what do you expect from this? Well, it's a Ramones record. It's punk rock, but this has got a little. This one has a little more variety than you might expect. I'll talk about this in a bit, but this is the Ramones trying to be commercial, not necessarily succeeding, but it's still got some great punky tunes, including some of their classics. So the context for this album, I always think the Ramones sound a little sterile on record. I mean, I think it's the nature of punk rock that you're never going to get. You know, the music is all about energy and communion between the band and the audience, and you're never going to get that energy in the studio, no matter how hard you try. So again, the Ramones, I think, just end up sounding a little bit sterile on the record. You can tell how electric these songs would be in a live context. When this album comes out, the Ramones are part of the big, sort of CBGB club scene, early proto-punk and alternative, and call it what you want, scene on the Lower East Side in New York, where you've got the Ramones, you've got Talking Heads, you've got Blondie, you've got Television, you've got all these folks, and it is just a real ferment of music reacting against kind of the trajectory of mainstream rock and roll, and containing, amongst other things, sort of the foundations of punk, would be highly influential for the British punks as well, although they always denied it, but I fail to see how it can't be true. And the Ramones, of course, are part of this, and by '78 they're starting to see, some of the chart or crossover success of some of the other acts they talked about, like Blondie and like Talking Heads, who are now starting to sell a lot of records, and so meanwhile the Ramones, although critically and appreciated and really appreciated by their fan base, had a small fan base, and so the question is, well, how can they go up a gear? How can they too cross over? And so what they had to rely on, they had some other gears as a band, other than than sort of 3-chord power punk tunes, for which they'd been so good at, but their other gears were a little more retro, and it really shows in this album. So I mean, the Ramones had a real fascination for '60s pop, and that really comes out in this record. There's several experimentations in that direction, which didn't really strike a chord with their audience. And this album, relative to their prior ones, did not do very well at all. It was not well reviewed. That said, subsequently, like almost everything they did from that period, it's been reappraised and has been reappreciated as a classic. And I think this album is a classic album. Whether or not it was popular at the time, whether or not it was seen as a sellout album at the time, I think it's really strong. And the variety on this, even given that there are some experiments that don't really work, is probably worth having, as opposed to just 12 3-chord songs without much variety. So the music. So most of the experimentation is on side 1. Side 2 is much more, not exclusively, but much more in a classic Ramones, what you'd expect if you'd heard their first 3 records. Side 1, it starts off with "I Just Want to Have Something to Do," which is it's classic sort of punk slacker sort of ethos lyrics. I always think that's just okay, lacking a little bit of energy. I've always thought it was a strange choice as an opener, given the energy of some of the other songs in the album. It's got, but I do like the theme. So it harkens back to sort of Iggy, "I'm Bored" and so on. Then we're on to "I Wanted Everything," which is where the energy level is back up. It's just a great punk tune. And then "Don't Come Close," where weirdly the kind of buzzsaw guitar tone is gone. You're like, what, which is a little bit surprising. Still has sort of CBGB sound, but this is a deviation, it's experimentation. Then we're back to the raw punk with I Don't Want You. And then we're into the, what would really have been the most eyebrow-raising song on the record, which is Needles and Pins, which is actually a cover of a Searchers song from the 60s. You don't think of the Ramones as a ballad band, but here they are, stretching out here. It's about as close as they would get to a ballad, certainly from this era. And it's a love song about relationship troubles. Kind of faithfully gotten that that 1960s sound, and you listen to this and the way it's delivered, and this song would not have been out of place, I don't think, on the Stones album England's Newest Hitmakers. It has that kind of early Jagger Richard kind of feeling their way kind of pop sound, but and also an infatuation with the same kind of music that the Stones were, in a more contemporary way, paying homage to on their early albums. Then side one closes out with a great song, a righteous punk anthem, I'm Against It. There's nothing wrong with that song at all. It's fantastic, and Johnny's guitar playing on this just drives it over the top. Is like if it doesn't move you, you don't have a punk pulse anyway. Side two begins with what became a Ramones classic and if you want to call it a punk standard, then there it is. I want to be sedated. So great. And then I think probably my favorite song in the album, the one that I think I heard first because a friend of mine had bought this record and insisted I listen to this particular song, which is Go Mental, and one of two reflections on mental health on this album. It's the thrashiest song on the record. It's just awesome. The guitar in the verses, right, is before the singing cuts in. That to me is punk rock. It is so good. It's as good or better than anything Steve Jones did on Nevermind the Bollocks. And there's even a guitar solo, a little unusual for the on the outro, a little unusual for Ramones. Then we went to Questioningly. This is another song which reminds me of that early Jagger Richards kind of sound or compositions. She's the One, back to much more thrashy punk. It's kind of like surf punk. It sort of reminds me a little bit of the Beach Boys, weirdly. And then Bad Brain, which of course is a song which the Bad Brains named their band after. So that's a pretty good endorsement. A great thrashy song. Great guitar in this, and a great little two-note vocal melody, and I love it. And then the closer, which is A Long Way Back, which is a kind of a heavy sort of mid-tempo rocker, but the guitar changes are still punk changes, and it's just okay. So opening and the closing of the album, weaker than the rest of the tracks. Some interesting experimentation. Not necessarily all of it working, but it makes for a diverse album, much more diverse album than they'd come up with before. Some dopey love songs on here, it's okay. Now, this is still a highlight in the punk oeuvre, and of the two sides, side two is the better one. There's at least 5 classic punk songs here. I give it 4 stars. I don't know if it's essential, I don't know if it's significant, but it's a great record.